The DevOps Foundation Course, Lesson 6, DevOps Culture.
Welcome to Lesson 6. In this lesson, we're going to look at some cultural considerations for DevOps, including understanding organizational culture, cultural debt, DevOps culture, and managing cultural change. Resistance to change and new ways of working has been the downfall of many process improvement initiatives. In this lesson, we'll give you some tools for success.
Let's start by thinking about an organization's culture and what it means. Organizational culture is the behavior of humans within an organization and the meaning people attach to those behaviors. It's essential we understand our culture when we plan to make changes because we need to understand how significant the impact of the change will be. Think about an example of a toxic culture. An organization where people gossip, backstab, finger point, and hoard information. Adopting DevOps practices here is going to be a big challenge, and the culture will need to be transformed. Alternatively, if an organization already works in a high-trust environment and is used to sharing information, then DevOps practices will be less disruptive. Culture can enable continuous improvement, or it can be a source of resistance. Culture is the way we do things in an organization, and changing the way we do things can leave people feeling scared, uncomfortable, and angry. Think about your own organization culture. If you were to start bringing in DevOps practices tomorrow, how much of a change would that be? Would you need to address any cultural issues first? Every organization has its own unique culture. Culture includes the organization's vision, values, norms, systems, symbols, languages, assumptions, beliefs, and habits. Culture is expressed in many ways, including how an organization conducts business, how an organization treats its employees, customers, and the wider community, freedoms allowed in decision-making, developing new ideas, and personal expression, how power and information flow through the organization's hierarchy, and how committed employees are towards collective objectives. Culture might be documented, well understood, and clearly communicated. Alternatively, it might be poorly understood and vague. Sometimes an organization might say it has one type of culture and then behave in a completely different way. Let's think about this with a quick exercise. Plan to spend about 15 minutes on this. Think about your own organization or a well-known company. Make some notes about its culture. What evidence do you have for your beliefs about its culture? How much would its culture need to change in order to adopt DevOps practices? We'll provide some suggestions in your exercise solutions document. A key concept for cultural analysis is the idea of cultural debt. This happens when cultural considerations are disregarded or deferred in favor of growth and innovation, often the net effect of IT's organizational silos. For example, an organization might be divided into teams based on skills or applications. Each team is managed differently, has its own practices and tools, and does not interface often with other teams. Communicating and collaborating with these silos is often difficult and frustrating, resulting in a lack of trust and unnecessary bottlenecks. This cultural debt will at some point need to be addressed. DevOps can pay down cultural debt by focusing on creating a trust relationship that includes human and technical interactions. All of the areas you can see on screen here can create cultural debt. How many of these have you experienced in your career? You can see where DevOps practices might start to break down cultural debt. For example, non-existent feedback loops create cultural debt. The DevOps second way, feedback, would help to address this area. For IT, cultural debt will have severe consequences. Projects and flow might suffer because of extensive silos, workflow constraints, and a lack of collaboration. Communication will be poor and might lead to miscommunication and errors. Ultimately, IT will see project delays, waste, and additional cost, the opposite of the outcomes we want to achieve. You can see a quote from Peter Drucker here. "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Peter Drucker was a management consultant whose work contributed to the philosophical and practical foundations of the modern business corporation. He invented management by objective. In this quote, Drucker is arguing that when an organization tries to adopt a strategy that is incompatible with its culture, culture will win and the strategy will fail. Culture can change, but it takes time, patience, and vision. IT is a community or society. Like any society, it's multicultural and prone to fragmentation. You can see some of IT's cultural groupings on screen here. Groups might be aligned to a tool, a methodology, or a framework. Each group has its loyal fans and its detractors. Really, we need to try and blend these groups and take a more holistic view. For example, just because we use ITIL doesn't mean we can't use Agile or Lean practices too. Each IT group will have its own messages, and some of them are very loud. You can see some examples here on screen. As groups get bigger, they might even start arguing internally and split to create smaller groups. IT staff might have to choose to ignore all the noise or listen only to messages from trusted sources. Ultimately, each organization needs to understand and adapt the tools, methods, and frameworks that will help them meet their goals and deliver value to the customers. Here's a quote from Sasha Bates, professional services consultant. Tools and processes are a reflection of your cultural choices. Think about what this means. Organizations that are process-bound and bureaucratic in nature will choose process-heavy bureaucratic ways of working. Organizations that are already open and high-trust are likely to embrace high-trust ways of working. This is why it's so important to understand where we are starting from and how it might influence our choices. On screen, you can see some characteristics of a DevOps culture. Are any of these surprising to you? Shared goals, visions, and incentives are essential for DevOps to help break down silos and improve integration and collaboration. The culture needs to create a safe environment with high trust and a learning culture. People need to feel free to speak up, for example, during blameless postmortems that focus on what went wrong, not who messed up. Some companies reward teams that support learning and improvement. This sends a strong cultural message about the sort of behavior that is welcomed and encouraged. Real culture change takes time. It must be incremental and performed at a realistic pace. One common analogy that's used is the start of a big race like a marathon. The manager knows what they want to do, and they are off, sprinting down the road. All of the staff don't have the message yet, and they are milling around on the start line wondering when and where to go. IT needs to transform its behavior. Drag and drop the opposite words into the to column to see where we need to change. For example, from reactive to proactive. Click Submit to see how you did. Here's some further examples of from and to behaviors. Drag and drop the opposites to see where we need to be. Organizations that want to be successful need to aspire to a high-trust culture. High-trust organizations encourage good information flow, cross-functional collaboration, shared responsibilities, and learning from failures and new ideas. High-trust cultures empower people, reducing waste, because staff aren't waiting for a decision or for someone to tell them what to do. This diagram compares and contrasts the low-trust and high-trust organization. Where would your organization sit? Think about, for example, an organization that wants every change to be approved by a change advisory board that only meets weekly. This will slow down changes and increase the cost of handling them. And, according to the State of DevOps report of 2014, it will have no impact on restore times and only a negligible effect on the number of failed changes. The table on screen shows some extracts from a study that looked at how culture affected the performance of a medical unit. The concepts, however, apply to any type of organization. You don't need to remember the characteristics of each type of organization for your exam, but you will need to be able to recognize the characteristics of a high-trust culture. Remember the dictionary definition of pathological. It means unhealthy or diseased. Is this appropriate for any organization you have worked with? In the context of DevOps, there are a number of techniques we can use to create and maintain a high-trust culture. These include encouraging and creating boundary-spanning teams, making quality, availability, and security everyone's responsibility, not just ops, holding blameless postmortems when incidents and outages occur to develop effective countermeasures and encourage learning, and maximize everyone's creativity to find novel solutions to problems. Creating a learning culture will be essential to support growth and innovation. Many organizations think of learning as part of training, something that staff might do for a few weeks a year, or something that gets canceled when budgets are tight. Learning needs to become part of daily business as usual, or the organization will fail to grow and adapt. To create a learning culture, leaders and managers within an organization must value learning and walk the talk to show how they expect staff to behave. So, how do we make learning a part of our organizational culture? Spend a few minutes thinking about what we could do, then click the diagram to reveal some suggestions. Do they tally with your ideas? With any change, we should expect some conflict. Many individuals will try to avoid conflict, but to support organizational change, it needs to be acknowledged and discussed. The diagram you can see here is the Thomas Kilmann conflict inventory, which measures a person's behavioral choices under different types of conflict situations. Do you avoid conflict? How is conflict addressed in your organization? This table shows the Thomas Kilmann conflict modes. People may adapt different modes in different situations, but we typically have a default mode that we revert to. Think about when you have seen people behave in each of these ways. Are any of these always right or always wrong? Competing mode is often associated with individual power. Accommodating mode is the opposite. An individual neglects their own concerns. Avoiding conflict often only delays it, so collaboration and compromise are often the most positive approaches. Before we move on to look at how we manage culture change, here's a quote from Jack Welch, chairman and CEO of GE between 1981 and 2001. An organization's ability to learn and translate that learning into action rapidly is the greatest competitive advantage. How well does your organization learn? Our final topic for this lesson is managing culture change. Think about organizations you've been involved with that needed to change their culture. Was it easy? How was it managed? Was it successful? Our main takeaway for this topic is that culture change is never easy. To be successful, we must accept that change almost always takes longer and costs more than expected. Stakeholder involvement is critical. People who are engaged with the change process and change decisions are far more likely to accept the change. To be successful when introducing culture change, it's a good idea to introduce some organizational change management practices. These will provide structure, preparation, and motivation to give people the education they need to embrace and support change. Remember, people are less likely to resist any idea if they feel some sense of ownership or involvement. Time for another quote. This quote comes from Buckminster Fuller, the man who codified the math behind the geodesic dome. He said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model which makes the existing model obsolete." DevOps can give us a new model to revolutionize how we work in IT and with the business. As we've already mentioned, for an organization to adopt DevOps successfully, it needs to have a culture that enables and encourages collaboration. The culture needs to be blame-free, to encourage people to make mistakes and speak their minds. People will adapt to the values and practices of the organizational culture, but it will take time. Make changes incrementally. Think about the plan, do, check, act approach we studied earlier, and accept that there will be some backsliding along the way. Successful DevOps is all about the people and the culture. We talked about communication, collaboration, and integration. These are all related to people. DevOps is about how people think, interact, behave, work, and perceive themselves and their colleagues. One person can't drive DevOps up through the organization. It takes a team effort, led by management, with an appetite to change the culture. On screen, you can see a table showing different reactions to change and what management can do in each situation. A minimum of staff are typically either early adopters who embrace change or naysayers who are not comfortable with change at all. Management needs to encourage and reward their early adopters to empower them to be change agents. They might be given responsibility for carrying out part of a plan, to get them involved and keep them excited. Management time is not well spent trying to change the mind of the naysayers, as they can become even more entrenched in their ideas. The naysayers will eventually face a choice to become part of the new culture or leave. The majority of staff are fairly neutral about change. With the right vision and training, they will accept the change as being worthwhile and eventually normal. To support cultural change, we need to empower new behaviors. Many of our activities will be aimed at engaging and educating existing staff. According to a research report titled, "What Smart Businesses Know About DevOps," over 70% of DevOps leaders are focused on training their existing staff, with only 50% hiring new resources. Our existing staff will already have good knowledge of the business, current services, and strategy. DevOps can change how they work together to improve performance and flow. Sharing between peers, organizations, and industries is a crucial factor in the growth and acceptance of DevOps. Spend 5 minutes making some notes about what you could do in your organization to empower new behaviors. For example, you might introduce some job shadowing. When you've made some notes, click on the diagram to reveal more suggestions. Cultural change is very difficult to drive from the bottom up without management commitment. Really, it needs to come from the top down, and so managers will play an important role. Soft skills and emotional intelligence are essential. To introduce self-organizing teams, managers need to focus on coaching and leading, rather than dictating to people what will happen. This can be a large cultural shift for organizations with a command and control type structure. Management can't expect people to change without support. Support can come in many forms, from coaching through to budget for training or time to learn new ways of working. You can see some examples of the skills managers will need here. How much of a change will this be for your organization? Will your managers need some training before you can get started? Our final key concept to consider is change fatigue. Some IT professionals feel like they are being faced with a new way of working every month. What now? Last week it was ITIL, then ISO 20000, then Agile, then Lean, now DevOps? Change fatigue is a general sense of apathy or passive resignation towards organizational changes by both individuals and teams. This might be characterized by a whatever attitude. DevOps? Yeah, whatever. I won't change anything because we'll be doing something different next week. Change fatigue can mean people feel cut off from the organization and can't commit to accepting a change. It can happen when there is too much change too quickly, making people feel confused and helpless. People might not understand how changes are connected, how they support business goals, or what they mean for them. Remember the WIFM factor. What's in it for me? To help overcome change fatigue, accept that some level of resistance is normal and try not to attempt too much change too quickly. Communicate the big picture. Why is the change happening? How are changes connected? How do they support business goals? Sometimes staff can't see how a small change that affects them is part of something much larger. Ensure each change initiative has an intended outcome and that it's communicated. Empower people to contribute and celebrate success, no matter how small. Finally, create visible feedback and improvement loops so everyone is engaged. The amount of change fatigue that people experience is directly impacted by the way the change is managed. Let's finish with a quote from Lloyd Taylor, a VP of Infrastructure at NG Moko. You can't directly change culture, but you can change behavior, and behavior becomes culture. Without culture change, DevOps will not be successful. Here's a quick quiz to test what you've learned. Click the Next button to move on to it when you're ready.
Okay, that brings us to the end of Lesson 6, where we looked at some cultural considerations for DevOps, including understanding organizational culture, cultural debt, DevOps culture, and managing cultural change. Think about what we've studied and plan for change resistance in your own DevOps implementation. How will you overcome it?